Well, thank you so much, and thanks to the library for continuing this tradition. Even last year, we managed to do it online, which was great to keep it going. When Chris contacted me 12 years ago to ask about professors who wanted to speak to the book clubs, I sort of offhandedly said, well, if you ever do something by Robertson Davies, I'd be happy to speak about that because I know a little bit about Robertson Davies. And that ended up being the genesis of this event. And I'm really gratified that it's going on 12 years later. Our first reader is someone that you will be familiar with if you're familiar with this series, or indeed almost any of the arts activities here in Cape Breton. He's been synonymous with the performing arts in this area for as long as I've been in this area, and probably maybe a bit before that too. He's been part of this program since it started 12 years ago, and I always look forward to his stories. He manages to get the flavor of the original Robertson Davies stories, but he always finds a way to make it uniquely his own. So please welcome Ken Chisholm.
Thank you, Todd. Joyce was showing me her story, and it's in like 3-foot-high type. I'll have to do that for next year. I've struggled with how to introduce the story, and I'll just say that this might be my first PG story. The hills are alive! I squinted at the garishly colored poster taped to the inside window of Ed's used bookstore. One performance only, it warned. Christmas Day only at the Cap. Rogers and Hammerstein's The Sound of Music. Our local performance venue, the Coastal Arts Pavilion, more familiarly known as the Cap, always celebrated the holidays in a big way. This year they were hosting, according to the poster, the world-renowned Untitled Chapter theater ensemble direct from Austria. Wait, there was another exclamation point after that bit. Direct from Austria! Followed by the inevitable once-in-a-lifetime experience! Exclamation point. I sensed a presence beside me and found a small, hunched, grandmotherly figure all dressed in black standing next to me regarding the poster with goggle-eyed expression. She pointed a gray, crooked finger at the poster and exclaimed in a heavy Teutonic accent, "Untitled! Untitled!" and with surprising agility sprinted off down Charlotte Street crying, "Untitled! Untitled!" as she grabbed the arms of startled pedestrians while she furiously pointed back towards me and the poster. These guys must really be a famous bunch if they can get this reaction, I thought, assuming she was off to book tickets for the grandkids. I noticed the show was a rental and presented by Big Little Productions, producer Ginger Little. Ginger Little. Another Cape Breton theater kid who had grown up and went off island to pursue her stage ambitions. Now she returned to our island with her own touring show. Impressive. But The Sound of Music was an odd choice for Ginger. She had always been a bit outre. I remembered sitting through her 3-hour one-person show she titled Shock Mime. Still, The Sound of Music was an entrenched holiday standard, mainly because the film version was broadcast on network television every year at Christmas time. Cinemas around the world also mounted captioned sing-along screenings that filled the seats with audience members costumed as all the characters in the show. Maria, the winsome convict who is brought in to supervise the brood of mischievous Von Trapp children, and with patience and a catchy song score, wins them over along with their stern but handsome father. Then there are Nazis, blah, 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 and they all escape towards freedom over the Alps. There is not a single Christmas song or even a passing mention of the holiday in the show's entire 3-hour run. But its broadcast proximity to Christmas has made it a holiday standard, because you just can't argue with television. The tickets for the evening performance sold out on the TAP website in under an hour. But I knew Friedrich, the venue's managing director, from my working in a number of their shows, and they gave me their okay to sit and enjoy the afternoon tech run. I had small interest in the actual show, but great interest in how Ginger was getting on in her theatrical ambitions. On Christmas Day, glutted after gathering with my family at my sister's house for our traditional noontime turkey fest, I walked the few short blocks to the TAP. Friedrich let me in the theater side door, then they excused themselves to attend to some front-of-house duties. Ever since the old church building that housed the TAP had been converted, or perverted into proper ecclesiastical terms, into a theater, there had been rumors among various casts of spectral sightings throughout the building. But I never saw anything. And having had my own encounters with the uncanny, I remained skeptical. This day, though, the interior of the TAP was as cold and dank as a tomb. I could hear the eerie chain-like clank of the radiators warming up, and it would be close to the evening show before their heat would be felt. The auditorium was in darkness. A couple of pale green lights illuminated small patches of the stage. I inched my way toward the front row of seats, hoping no one had left a stray prop or electrical cord to trip me over. "Halt, theater mensch!" A panicked female voice cried out behind me in the wings, startling me into immobility. I turned and saw a familiar face emerge into some spill light from the stage. The mascara around her eyes was raccoon-like. Her hair spiked out in all directions in smoky blue and purple hues, and she was wearing a ragged "Merry Christmas from the Ramones" t-shirt. It was Ginger. "Oh, it's you," she said, with a mixture of relief and disappointment. I explained Friedrich had given me permission to attend the rehearsal. They had no business doing that without my permission, she said. Then she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and with forced politeness asked, "It's been a while. Have you done anything interesting lately?" I knew she was not asking if I had cured cancer or scaled Mount Everest. She meant, had I done any theater she would have found worth watching. She was unsurprised when I replied, "No, not really," but cut in when I tried to mention my work on a short film. "Aton, halt, care, Sofoff, Zurich," Ginger hollered to one of her cast as he warily approached the stage from the wings. She caught herself, seeing my expression, said, "They love to be on stage, but I have to keep them to a routine, otherwise it'd be..." She paused. I said, "Chaos?" "Pandemonium," she corrected me. "Take a seat, somewhere in the back where you won't be a distraction to the cast. The show will start as soon as Anson shows up with..." And right on cue, the street door to the theater opened wide, letting in the dismal December light along with two backlit forms. "Nana!" Ginger exclaimed, practically skipping to greet her arriving brother and grandmother. Anson I knew from his tech work on Ginger's student productions, such as "My Revenge Will Be Frosted" and the unforgettable "How I Killed My Brother." She must have tapped his services to run the audio and lighting cues. Nana I knew from her dreaded attendance at all of Ginger's plays. During Dracula's Plumber, while the high school-aged Count was shyly attempting to bite the neck of the ingenue, Nana loudly yelled out during this only redeeming moment of suspense, "Why isn't this over already?" Nana had not mellowed. "Get the show going," she bellowed at Ginger when her granddaughter tried to hug her. "I want to see Maria. Where's Maria? This place is cold as the grave. My new dentures are killing me." "We'll get you in the front row and we'll start the play right away, just for you," Ginger said as she guided her to her seat. Ginger turned to me and added, "Would you mind sitting with her? She tends to get up and wander." As much as I wanted to, I could not say no. We guided Nana to the center of the front row. Anson put a cushion on the seat. Ginger wrapped a knitted afghan around her shoulders, and I was charged with sitting next to her, holding her Tim Hortons cup of ultra-hot tea to hand to her on demand. Ginger, and as producer and impresario, went backstage to get her company ready. Anson headed to the balcony where the lighting and soundboards were located, but first warned me, make sure there's no audience participation. The lobby door opened and Friedrich hurried in. "Close the damn door," Nana hollered at him as he hurried down the aisle, and she performed a mock shiver for my benefit. "The cold agitates my new dentures." Friedrich was very obliging for being ordered around in their own theater. They sat next to me and asked, "Did I miss anything fun?" "Quiet, you, my granddaughter is on stage," Nana chided. Ginger was down center stage in a lime green light. "Welcome to the Coastal Arts Pavilion for the dress rehearsal of The Sound of Music, the first touring production of Big Little Productions. Our featured company comes all the way from the home country of the world-famous Von Trapp family, the subjects of this musical presentation. Before we begin the show, I just wanted to dedicate it to my Nana Jean, who I used to snuggle with at every Christmas when I was a kid when we watched the show on TV. Enjoy the show, Nana." "I will when you stop your yammering," Nana muttered. So, without further ado, Big Little Productions presents Rodgers and Hammerstein's The Sound of Music. Ginger hastened from the center stage towards the wings. The house lights went dark, and the stage lights went dark, and the theater's sound system swelled with a pre-recorded track of the intro to the opening song. The cyclorama at the back of the stage lit up with a projected video of aerial views of the snow-capped Austrian Alps. A dark form crept from the wings to a dim ring of light at center stage. It was the actress playing Maria, in blonde pigtails, white apron, and blue pinafore, offset by her slightly grayish complexion. She paused, stared blankly into the darkened auditorium, and sang with angelic gusto, "The hills are alive." And then her lower jaw detached itself from her face and clattered to the floor. Without missing a beat, Maria kept trying to sing her solo. But without her jawbone, her angelic voice was reduced to low bestial groans and moans, and her tongue waved back and forth like a bell clapper. Ginger rushed from the wings and attempted to guide the unfortunate creature off stage. But before Ginger could uproot the determined Maria from singing her song, a troop of nuns had already followed Ginger onto the stage and began singing, "How do you solve a problem like Maria?" As if in reply to their musical question, Ginger had picked up Maria's detached jawbone and was frantically trying to reattach it to her lead actor's face. A sound of shuffling feet in the backstage grew as shadowy figures converged on stage from both wings, revealing themselves to be various Von Trapp kinder, their stern-faced father, and various other supporting characters, all of them singing a babble of songs from the show's score. The routine has been broken, Ginger called to us. We have to get them back on track or they'll run wild. With a shrug, she finally admitted, because they're all zombies. Are you telling me you brought a troop of zombies to do the Sound of Music? I asked, incredulous. How did you even find me? How did they get this way? Ginger said, it's too long a story to explain, but Anson chimed in. Barnstorming the show to Caribbean tourist resorts, at one stop they were really rude to the staff. Staff hired local shaman to curse them. Booking agency dropped their performance fee. Ginger cut in, and they were still eligible for a Canada Council touring grant. And with a smirk, Anson cut in on Ginger. She feeds them raw Wiener Schnitzel instead of, people. I did it for Nana, Ginger said, walking off the stage. I wanted to show her I was making it in my theater career. And if there's a time, like when she's not with us anymore. Oh, last all of you, Nana chimed in. So how do we get them back under control, Friedrich asked. We have a sold-out audience showing up in a couple of hours. We can't have your cast eating people. It's Rodgers and Hammerstein, not Sondheim. Theater joke. Ginger thought for a second and quickly said, if we can make them think it's the end of the performance, it will cool them out and I can get them back on the tour bus before the evening show. Friedrich snapped their fingers and said, I know what to do. In fact, I've been waiting my entire life for this. Before we could react, Friedrich leapt on stage and in front of the assembled zombies belted out the opening bars of the finale sign, climb every mountain, ford every stream, as the body of the swarm of costume zombies turned on Friedrich with a snarl. First, because audience participation was strictly verboten. Secondly, it wasn't his song. He was stealing focus from the chorus of nuns whose number it rightfully belonged to. The male chorus, in their stormtrooper costumes, formed a rocket-like kickline and jackbooted Friedrich upstage where they bounced off the cyclorama and crumpled to the floor. The enraged zombies were on Friedrich instantly. Two groups of cute-faced Von Trapp children each grabbed onto each of Friedrich's arms and were pulling on his arms, their arms, like Friedrich was a Christmas turkey wishbone. The other zombies massed around the struggling Friedrich, crowding our line of sight so we could only hear what befell our friend. Friedrich howled an indelible cry of anguish, followed by a double wet pop, and a twin spray of bright red covered the majestic blue of the Austrian Alps projected on the cyclorama. There were a couple of whimpers, then the whimpering went quiet, then only the horrific noise of enthusiastic chewing. We were rooted where we stood, shocked, sickened, saddened to our souls. The zombies turned and set their gaze on me, Ginger, Anson, and Nana, their lips and teeth bloody smears, their eyes lit with hungry intent. Tell them they're way off script, Nana said to Ginger. The zombies shuffled purposefully towards us. We should run to it, said Anson. And let loose a pack of ravening undead on Sydney, Ginger said. I'd never get another artist, Grant. Off script, I said, as an idea lit up my brain. Climb every mountain isn't the end of the show. Friedrich had it wrong. Come on, follow my lead, as I threw myself into a seat. Ginger and Anson plunked themselves down next to me with puzzled looks. Bravo, I shouted, immediately jumping to my feet, madly applauding. Bravo! Encore! Encore! Ginger and Anson instantly knew what I was doing. No Cape Breton theatrical presentation is really over until the obligatory standing ovation that is the actual finale. Their zombies halted their advance on us. They all had puzzled expressions. They sensed something was out of order, but being theater folk in their zombie hearts, they could not resist the gratification of a three-person standing ovation over that of a blood fist. They went through the entire roster of the rehearsed curtain calls. Nuns, soldiers, Reverend Mother, Von Trapp children, Captain Von Trapp, Maria, and in varying combinations of the entire cast. It was tiring, all of that applauding, all of those bravos, but it was certainly better than being the setting of a local zombie apocalypse. It was only after Ginger had guided the now docile pack of undead onto the tour bus that we noticed Nana. In the confusion, she had wandered off and been nipped in the shoulder by one of the undead. "What happened, Nana?" Ginger cried. "I told one of those nuns she looked like a common streetwalker with all that red lipstick smeared on her mouth. And she bit me, the hussy," Nana said, still ready for the fight. "Oh, Nana," Ginger was tearing up, "don't leave me." "She's not going anywhere," Anson said. "She's just going to turn into a zombie." "How can you be so cruel? Nana can't be a zombie." "Sure she can," Anson replied brightly. "But now we don't have to worry about, losing her." "Oh," Ginger said. And suddenly, a huge childlike grin ignited her face. "Do you hear that, Nana? You get to come with Anson and me and visit all kinds of new places and watch The Sound of Music every single night. Won't that be grand?" With a childlike expression, Nana looked at Ginger and asked, "I'm feeling very hungry. Is there anything I can nibble on?" "There's plenty of Wiener Schnitzel on the bus," Ginger replied. "It's lovely you're looking after your Nana, but what if she tries to bite someone?" I said. Ginger said, "Do us one more little favor and that won't be a problem." The evening performance was a huge hit. Yes, we mourned the untimely consumption of Friedrich, but every seat in the house was filled by a paying customer. The concession stand did big business, and Friedrich more than anyone would have understood the show must go on. The entire company was across the causeway on the mainland before anyone reported Friedrich missing. The authorities found some gnawed bones backstage and the bloody smears on the cyclorama and concluded he had been attacked by a pack of wild stray dogs. No one contradicted their findings. The theater community mourned Friedrich in the traditional way with a song and dance review production of Friedrich's favorite show tunes. It was a huge hit, and it was successfully remounted for the summer tourist season. I often think about Ginger and how her quest to earn her Nana's approval led to such horror. I find myself remembering my own mom and all the time she told me how she once saw, as a young woman, the actual Von Trapp family live and in the flesh in performance at Sydney's Lyceum. It was one of her most cherished memories. It makes me ponder what I would do just to hear her tell that story one more time. But I am content with the picture I took of Mum happily surrounded by her daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter. It's here on my desk as I write, right next to Nana's brand new dentures, exclamation point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken. Our next reader joined this series in 2018, and I recall that story being especially haunting, which I think is really saying something, given that they're all ghost stories. So please welcome Joyce Rankin.
It's called The Fairy Ring. It was the morning of Christmas Eve, December 24th, and I was getting ready for the next few days. The tree was up and decorated, and the fridge was filled with food. There was tea on the stove, rum in the cupboard, salami and cheese in the fridge, and a box of chocolates on the coffee table. The porch was filled with wood. I was making kindling because I didn't want to take time for that chore in the next few days. If you keep the fire going and bank it well at night, there should be enough coals in the morning to revive it by adding some dry kindling. In fact, I rather take pride in my ability to get it going with just 3 sticks of kindling. It was a perfect day for outside chores. There was snow on the ground, and the sun was shining, and the air was clear. The sun sparkled, and the grains of snow drifted on the woodpile. The water in the harbor was very blue. With the leaves gone from the trees, I could see clearly the big house to the north. It's deteriorated even more in the last 5 years since the old man died. When we moved here, it was white and rather impressive, but over the years, it grew more shabby. When Angus died without a will, it was in rough shape and there was no one to take over, because he'd lived there with his mother, who also died without a will, and the whole thing was a legal tangle that nobody wanted to tackle. He was a fine old man. If I made a big pot of stew or a pan of biscuits, I would drop some off to him. In return, he always told me to come and pick blueberries from his field, and in the fall, he'd tell me to come over and fill a couple of feed bags full of apples. They were big old apple trees, like the old transparent apples that you don't see anymore. There's a tree in the corner with nutty brown russet apples. They're not much for cooking, but they're delicious to eat. So I was thinking that it must be a lovely farm, the house on the rise of the hill, sloping down to the river and broad interval fields of loamy soil. And as I set a half round of wood on the chopping block, I noticed something irregular in the grain. I stepped closer and peered at it. There was something embedded in the wood. It was something metal, gold-colored, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. Now I was curious. The best way to extract it was to chip away the wood around it, so I grasped the axe near the head and started splitting off small pieces to expose the glint of metal. On the last blow, I miscalculated, went in too far, and the axe pinged with the impact sound of metal on metal. There was a whoosh and a pop, and out of the corner of my eyes, I saw a shadow. I turned my face toward it, and there was a woman dressed in city clothes from the 1940s. "Who are you?" I said. She responded quite straightforwardly, not in the mysterious, floaty way I expected from a ghost. "Catherine, I'm Catherine," she said. "When I lived here, they called me Caddy. I lived across the field, but this was one of my favorite places to come. It was a beautiful meadow, and I rode my horse through it on the way to visit my boyfriend. Oops. He lived in the big white house." "Oh," I said, "but why are you here now?" "Well," she said, "that's my ring you're hacking at." "Oh, I'm so sorry." "No, don't worry," she said. "I left it behind because I didn't want it." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Angus gave me the ring for Christmas, but I didn't want it. I turned him down. I left on the train on January 2nd. I figured that was a good time to start a new life. I went to Toronto to find work. I expected to work in a factory, but I found work in a publishing house, and within 5 years, I was assistant editor. For years, I was editor in all but name, but of course you know, in those days there was slim chance that I would hold the position or get the pay, but my boss knew perfectly well that he needed me, so I was well paid and got some privileges. And when he finally died, I was appointed to the position. I used to think about coming back home, but I met someone and it never happened." "You never came back home to Angus? You married another man?" "No, I never married. The person I met was a woman. We moved in together, and we were together for the rest of our lives. In those days, we were roommates. It was the fairies who sent me, really. I was going along in a pretty uncomplicated way. Angus was next door. We knew each other all our lives, and it seemed inevitable. My parents were happy to know that I was marrying someone they knew and liked and trusted. The farm was large and prosperous, and Angus was already known to be a hard worker. One day, I went for a walk across the field and took a detour up the hill. I followed a deer track, or what I thought was a deer track, and I found myself in a clearing in the woods. There was a hillock with a ring of stones embedded in the grass around it. When I stepped forward into the ring, I felt the breath go out of me in a whoosh, and I saw them, 3 little fairies. Not tiny like you see in books, but more like about 18 inches tall and looking more like some very small humans than like the cartoon Tinkerbell. One of them came and reached up to take my hand, and they led me forward into an opening in the ground. I found myself entering into a tunnel and then into what seemed like an underground city. It was a city of books and book readers. There were printing presses on every corner and books piled everywhere and people reading and gathered in clusters discussing the books. Oh, it looked so wonderful. It was so appealing. I turned and I said, "Where are we?" She said, "You are in the city of books, the city of publishing, the place where the books are made and put on trains to be sent throughout the country." I asked her where I would find such a place, and she said, "Toronto." And that's when I knew I couldn't marry Angus without going to see such a place. Not just see it, but try it for myself. I wanted to try that life that was so different from the one I had. So I went. I took the train. I had money saved for my wedding, and I spent it on my train fare. There were sure to be people from this area in Toronto. I asked my mother who would be the ones that I could ask, and she wrote to the daughter of a neighbor, and the daughter was married, and she lived right downtown, which would make it easier for me to get around on my own. Mother asked her if I could stay for a few days until I got on my feet. They said that yes, they were doing for me what someone else had done for them years before, maybe even a relative of my own. But in the textbook I edited later, the author described it as chain migration. But it was just common sense. You went somewhere where there were people you could count on in an emergency, people to give you advice, people who spoke like us so you didn't feel lonely. I already knew quite a bit of English, so I knew I could manage the trip. I found a suitcase in the attic that belonged to one of my mother's sisters when she came home from Boston to stay. I had 3 outfits, a hairbrush, a toothbrush, and a face cloth. I packed a lunch of biscuits and cheese, apples and oatcakes. They sold tea on the train, so I treated myself in the mornings, but that was a little expensive, so in the daytime, I drank water from the tap in the washroom. I knew I had to make my money last. When I arrived, I made my way to the address I had written down. I had to stop and get directions 3 times, but everyone was nice. It turned out that the husband, his name was Bernie, worked at McClellan & Stewart in the warehouse. Jean had worked there too. How they met was she had to go to the warehouse for something, and she heard these 2 fellows speaking Gaelic to each other, and she could tell by the accent they were from Inverness County. So she went over to them, and turned out they were from Inverness, from Deepdale, actually. They were brothers, and they'd been there a few years. So they were glad to see someone from home. Jean and Bernie started going out, and then they got married. It was Jean, though, who got me the job. She worked for one of the editors, and they were very sad when she left. Her recommendation was worth gold. She didn't say anything when she first wrote, because she wanted to get a reading on me, get to know me before she recommended me, which was fair enough. But when she did recommend me, I had a job right away on the strength of her say-so. Amazingly, within a week, I had a job with a publishing house. I loved my job. It was so interesting. You had to be organized, and you had to be polite and pleasant to everyone who called, so supposing they were dissy as a bag of hammers. Or if it was somebody famous and you loved their books, you had to be warm, but not too warm, and helpful. And there was what they called a slush pile, all the unsolicited manuscripts lying on a table, and you could read them. Imagine, I got to read all the books I wanted and give an opinion if I wanted. It turned out that I had a knack for picking winners, so I got to be editorial assistant and help the authors with revisions and fact-checking. I was quite good at it, and eventually, after some years, I was made an editor. I was always had the intention of going home, though I was pretty reluctant to leave the publishing house. It wasn't just that I was earning pretty good money by that point. I was learning so much and getting to know the city. Back when I was first arrived and looking for a place to live, I had put an ad in the bulletin board at work, and I got a call from one of the other clerks, Laura, who had an apartment and wanted a roommate for company. We met. We liked each other right away. We moved in, became good friends, and then slowly I realized that what I felt for Laura was beyond anything I felt for Angus. What I felt for Angus was a deep bond of friendship and a high regard for his character. My feelings, my desire to go home, was not desire for Angus, but homesickness. I knew when I saw him again it would be just like before, because that's what you do with oldest and deepest friends. After all, they're the people who know you best, and you have a whole life in common. It was love, but the love of a deepest friendship. What I felt for Laura was passion and admiration and a deep connection. Even though she came from a very, very different background than me, we were connected. So, I knew I didn't want to marry Angus. In those days, of course, loving another woman was forbidden, but it was easy to appear simply as roommates and friends. We lived together for 29 years. Whenever I had vacation, I would come home to visit. Laura went to her family on her vacation, but 3 times she came with me as my friend from work. We visited with my parents and sisters and with my cousins. Angus walked across the field and sat in my parents' kitchen. It was almost like old times. Every year he asked me, "When are you moving home?" And every year I said, "I like it where I am." The first time I took Laura home, my brothers tried to find a boyfriend for her. They all seemed to think that my life in Toronto was a temporary thing. But every time I came home, I would set aside an afternoon to take a long walk up the hill to the ferry ring. I didn't see those ferries again, but I always got the sense that they were there and watching me, encouraging me. I left little gifts for them, colored ribbon, pretty shells from the beach, or flowers from my mother's garden. Laura liked it here, but Angus didn't really like having her around. He was a bit jealous, I think. I think he really believed that I would come back home eventually and marry him, and thought she was making that more unlikely. He never said it, and I never asked. After Laura died, I did move back home, but I didn't marry Angus. I bought a little house near the shore and fixed it up. Angus and I spent time together, went to the dances together, ate Christmas dinner together, but we never got married, never moved in. It's good to have old friends, and it's good not to have to clean up after someone and wash their underwear or feel obliged to cook what they like rather than what you like. I always wanted to see them again, the fairies. Their advice changed my life, made me a different person. It was following their advice that I met my Laura. I loved her more, even more than I loved the waves on the shore and the mountains rising behind. I couldn't have both, so I picked Laura. And then later, when she was gone, the shore was waiting for me. I felt bad for Angus, but what he was asking of me, I couldn't give. Well, that's such an interesting story. I'm glad you and Laura had each other, and it was nice to see that you and Angus got to spend time in the end. He's buried in the graveyard in Judik, right? Where are you buried? I'm in the graveyard too, but my body wasn't buried beside Angus. It's on the other side, near my parents. And that's why I need your help. I wanted to be buried with Laura, but of course that didn't happen. Nobody really knew about her and about our relationship. Nowadays, it wouldn't be a big deal, but by the time I died, I was so used to keeping secrets that I forgot how to talk about it. If I can't be buried with Laura, I'd like something of mine to be. She and I exchanged rings, and I wore mine till I died, but I wasn't buried with it. It was put away in a box with some costume jewelry. Your cousin Susan brought it, but she never got around to sorting through it, and it's down in her basement with some summer clothes that don't fit anymore. There's also a ruby pendant in the box that she probably thinks is fake, but it's not. Get her to sell the pendant, and there'll be enough money for both of you to travel to Toronto, actually to Oakville, and take my ring and bury it with Laura. I can do that, I told the ghost, thinking that I was glad it's Susan who had the box. At least she'll be likely to leave me when I told her. But a ruby pendant, I said, is way too much money just for a trip to Toronto. It's actually Oakville, she said, and you clearly haven't been to Oakville. "Thank you," she said. "I'll come and visit you again when you've got the ring." And then she was gone. I looked around and nothing was changed. The sun was still shining brightly on the snow and the water was deep and blue in the harbor. I put the axe on the chopping block and went to phone Susan. "Hi there, listen, I know you're probably in the middle of 100 things, but a couple of years ago, did you buy a box of costume jewelry at a yard sale when Caddy MacDonald died and they were cleaning out the house?" "I did." "And do you still have it?" "Yes, but I have no idea where it is." "It's down in the basement with summer clothes that don't fit you anymore." "What? What do you mean they don't fit?" "It's just that I have no occasion to wear them and I don't like those tight waistbands." "Right. So I'll make a visit next week and explain, but in the meantime, don't touch the box and don't let anyone near it. It's very important." "Okay, it's not like I need my summer clothes this week anyway." After I hung up from talking to Susan, I started thinking. The story of Catherine MacDonald and how she made her way in the publishing industry, starting from a humble secretary whose first language was Gaelic to become a respected editor, would be a marvelous story. I know someone who's gathering a series of articles on unsung women in Canadian history. This was exactly the kind of story that should get told. I'll need to do a bit of research to back up the narrative, but it's fascinating. To hell with the kindling, I sat down and sent off a proposal to write the story. I also wrote down all the details of the conversation before I could forget them. And then, because the sun was still shining and my boots and my old jacket were at the door, I put them both on. I headed up the hill toward the old apple orchard and beyond. When I got there, I expected it to be completely overgrown, but amazingly, the clearing was still there as Caddy described it. The trees and the green hillock and the ring of stones. I wasn't sure how this worked, but I thought the fairies needed to know all that happened since they met Caddy. I stepped forward and I felt the breath leave me in a whoosh. I was lightheaded, and then I saw them looking at me, 3 fairies.
If everyone would like to retake their seats, if they haven't already, we'll begin the second half with 2 more. We'll have 2 more stories. Our next reader is reading for the first time in this series, but she's had a long association because she is one of the editors at Third Person Press and who was a driving force behind Christmas stockings, still on sale, by the way, at the back of the room. And I know I'm willing to sign a copy if anybody cares. So please welcome Sherry Ramsay.
Thank you, Todd. It's exciting to join this august company of writers who have shared stories here. So my story is called Upon a Midnight Not So Clear. It came to me as I tiptoed down the stairs to my office at 1 minute after midnight. Even on Christmas Eve, a writer sometimes must answer the call of the muse, particularly when the muse has just provided the answer to a knotty plot problem. But it wasn't the idea that came to me. No, it was a voice, one I didn't recognize, issuing from the depths of my office. I paused on the last stair, peering into the dimly lit depths and wondering how they came to be lit at all. "But how will it impact our current obligations?" the voice asked. "Contractually, I mean." "Yes, contractually," echoed another voice, higher and with a slight lisp on the yes. My heart pounded as if a Christmas ribbon had been pulled too tight around it. I knew the rest of my family were, as mandated for Christmas Eve, snuggled all safe in their beds. Had I left my computer on to fall prey to some autoplay video on a sketchy website? I didn't think so, although the room's glow was that particular blue-white that suggested screen illumination. "She does treat you well, chaps?" came a question from a third voice, this one marked by an accent from somewhere in the British Isles. "She feeds us well," answered the lispy voice. "Kibble, of course, but she mixes it with wet." She takes me on lovely walks, the deeper voice chimed in, and the rest of the family is wonderful. Decent number of treats involved. All right, this could not be a video. And why were the voices talking about kibble? I snatched up a heavy marble bookend from the shelf at the bottom of the stairs and tiptoed to my office, prepared to do battle if necessary. By the grace of good fortune, I did not drop said bookend upon my foot as I took in the sight in my office. Arrayed in a small circle were my cat, Cheshire, my dog, Pilot, and 3 other animals whose semi-transparent forms, limned in an eerie blue-white glow, solved 2 parts of the mystery for me. They were undoubtedly ghosts, come to visit on Christmas Eve, as so many spirits seem wont to do, especially here in Cape Breton. It was their glow that lit the office. The other puzzle piece clicked into place mere seconds later. At midnight on Christmas Eve, my household pets had, temporarily I hoped, but also in accordance with legend, been granted the power of human speech. Cheshire and Pilot had their backs to me and were apparently so distracted by the visitors that they didn't notice my entrance immediately. 2 of the ghostly creatures, however, turned their eyes toward me as I stood, transfixed, in the doorway. Their combined stares rooted me to the spot, those of a long-haired cat and a bright-eyed raven. Contractually, of course, the third creature said, its voice as rumbly as waves on the ocean, contractually, your obligations to provide inspiration and companionship to your writer would continue. This speaker was a ghostly tortoise, small despite the size of its voice. Depending upon the writer, those obligations may or may not be affected by the addition of a third muse support, the cat added, turning its gaze back to my animals. Hello, old girl, the raven said, and Cheshire and Pilot whirled and saw me. Cheshire rolled expressive green eyes. Well, the jig's up, she lisped. I said, hello? The bookend felt extremely heavy, or perhaps my hand had grown extremely weak, and I set it down carefully on a shelf. The other cat, the ghostly one, gave me an appraising look, groomed a paw absently, and said, perhaps a bit lacking in intestinal fortitude, is she? Do you find that annoying? Before I could protest that I was not exactly accustomed to finding ghostly critters in my office at midnight or any other time, Pilot loyally spoke up in my defense. She's more than satisfactory in every way, he declared in staunch support. Agreed, said Cheshire, with perhaps less enthusiasm than her canine companion, but what more can you expect from a cat? Humph, the ghost cat said. Well, in that case, I suppose it's only a matter of deciding which one of us will take her on. I managed to hold up a hand. Wait, please. If someone could just explain what's going on, I'd be grateful. I've figured out the whole animals speaking on Christmas Eve thing, I said, to forestall any unnecessary explications on that aspect of the tableau in my office. I'd just like to know who our visitors are and what you're all discussing. The raven seemed eager to educate me. Allow us to introduce ourselves first, he said, twitching a wing up as if to doff an imaginary cap. I'm Grip. The Grip? I asked, feeling a wash of intimidation. The ghost of Charles Dickens' raven? He shook out his feathers modestly. No, my namesake only. Would that we could all be as well remembered as that rare bird. Harley, offered the tortoise. Twister, the cat informed me in a bored tone. Pleased to meet you all, I said, although in all honesty I wasn't terribly thrilled about having ghosts in my office. The raven continued, well, as you might know, every writer has access to one or more, for the sake of simplicity, let's call them muses. I supplied, non-committally. The posited existence of muses was not a theory I thoroughly ascribed to, although I was willing to keep an open mind. So you've got Cheshire and Pilot here, right? The raven went on, gesturing to them with a wing. Now, they might not seem to be actively inspiring you at all moments, such as when they need to go out or be fed during the writing of a particularly engrossing or difficult scene, I suggested. Heaven knew that was nothing out of the ordinary. Well, creature comforts aside, they do function as your support and encouragement at times when you most need it, the raven said, with a touch of reproof in his tone. I sleep in your office an awful lot of the time when you're writing, Pilot noted. And I send you plenty of mental encouragement when you get stuck, Cheshire added. I relented. All right, it's true. You're both good writing companions. But what's that got to do with ghostly animals in my office on Christmas Eve? Well, you've reached a new writing milestone, the raven enthused, flapping his wings in excitement. You've leveled up, as the kids would say, which means your muse complement will increase. I shook my head. I don't know if I can convince the rest of my family to get another animal, I said, biting off the word pet. It struck me that perhaps creatures as obviously intelligent as these might take umbrage at the word pet. No need, the raven said. Since you've written enough ghost stories to qualify now, your next muse animal companion will be of the spirit variety. One of us, in fact. I frowned. Ghost stories? I don't really write ghost stories. There must be a mistake somewhere. But the raven and the tortoise both shook their heads. The ghostly cat continued to look mostly bored, with a touch of condescension. I rather hoped that, should all this turn out to be true, my new companion would not be the cat. You may not think you write ghost stories, but you have in fact completed the required quota, the tortoise said. We don't really make mistakes, the cat added. I mulled over my stories that had delved into the spirit world. There was the one about the ghost in a computer, and that one about the detective with a ghost for the client, the ghostly bagpiper, and, oh yes, the ghost girl in the garden. How many do I need to qualify? Just 4, the raven said. If you think about it, I'm sure you'll see we're right. I suppose you are. My mind was suddenly turning over the implications of this. So you're telling me that once writers dabble in enough ghost stories, we get a special ghostly muse. Wow, quick on the uptake, this one, the cat muttered. I ignored that. And presumably, these muses would help us write even more ghost stories. Any kind of stories, really, the raven said. We don't discriminate, although we do love the spooky ones. So like Robertson Davies, the tortoise chortled. Oh my, he had one for ever so long. Stephen King? Of course. My mind crept closer to home. Ken Chisholm? Todd Pettigrew? Oh, for sure. They got theirs long ago. They both write ghost stories every year for it. Yes, I know. I interrupted. They certainly kept quiet about it. I'd often wondered how those two could turn out last-minute stories every year. Perhaps ghost muses had their perks. At any rate, now you've earned yours, the tortoise said, and we were just getting a bit of inside information on you from your own dear companions, since the night and its attendant abilities was so fortuitous. Got it, I said. And how do you choose? Which one of you inspires me, I mean? Usually we hash it out among the candidates, said the cat, but since you're here, we could have a little fun with it. What kind of fun? I asked warily. It's Christmas, after all, the cat purred in a voice as sweet as a candy cane. So bring us each a gift. Whichever one of us you choose the best gift for will be your new companion. Smashing idea, the raven gushed. The tortoise nodded its small blunt head. I approve. But how can I get you gifts? I protested. It's midnight. Everything's closed. To say nothing of the fact that I had no idea what might constitute an appropriate gift for a ghost animal of any kind or description, but I didn't say that out loud. It can be something in the house, the cat said in a magnanimous tone, something you already have. You can do it, Pilot urged me. His liquid brown eyes were adoring. I believe in you. Well, I could hardly disappoint my dog, could I? All right, just wait here, I said, pushing up out of my chair. I'll come up with something. Don't take too long, the ghost cat advised. We don't have all night, and your animals can only hold on to their ability for a short time. I didn't see why that mattered, but the time for arguing with ghost cats seemed to have passed. Now I was on a mission. I left my spirit-lit office and went first to the kitchen. My animals were always hungry for treats, so my first thought was along those lines. As I stood in front of the shadowed cupboards, however, I realized I was on the wrong track. These were ghost animals. Whatever else they might or might not do, I was reasonably certain they did not need to eat. What else did my own animals like? Of course, I couldn't be sure because until tonight we'd never actually conversed. Toys? I had bought new toys for Cheshire and Pilot for Christmas. Would they mind if I gave one or more of them to the visitors? But the ghost animals didn't strike me as particularly playful. And what would a tortoise, even a non-ghost tortoise, do with a cat toy? No, that couldn't be it. I quickly ran through the kinds of things I might buy animal companions. Sweaters? No, I doubted ghosts felt the cold. Collars? I could just imagine that cat rolling her eyes at the mere idea. What did ghosts like? Books, I wondered desperately. They were obviously intelligent, but could they interact with the physical world enough to turn pages? No, now I was clutching at straws. And it had to be something I already had here in the house. I stood in the living room before the dark Christmas tree, its shadowed branches hovering protectively over the jumbled gifts, waiting for morning to arrive, and racked my brain. What could I give a ghost? Any ghost? I thought of them introducing themselves earlier. Grip's words came back to me. Would that we could all be as well remembered. And I had my answer. I turned and hurried quietly back to my office. Blue-white light still illuminated it, but the animals now spoke in hushed tones. I couldn't pick up any of the conversation as I returned. All 5 animals, living and ghostly, turned to regard me as I entered the room. Pilot glanced at my empty hands, and his expressive ears drooped in disappointment. Cheshire's left ear twitched, a sure sign of annoyance, and the ghost cat looked smug. "Can't think of anything?" the raven asked in a kind voice, tinged with dismay. No doubt he was wondering whether I deserved a ghostly companion at all. I shook my head. "I believe I've thought of the perfect thing," I said. "Do tell," said the ghost cat. "Ghosts like to be remembered, I think, and so I will put all of you in my next story. Whichever of you likes the story the most can stay on and join us." I scritched Cheshire under the chin and patted Pilot's head. "What do you think? Is that an adequate gift?" Said the ghost cat, twitching one ghostly ear. "Technically, you're not giving us that gift tonight, unless you're about to sit down and write it right this moment." I shook my head. "No, I came down to write something else, and I need to do that now before I forget. But within a few days, once the holiday bustle settles a bit, you'll have your story. Deal?" Grip and Harley nodded, and the tortoise said with a chuckle, "I always was a sucker for a good story." Twister acquiesced when Grip nudged the cat with his wing. "We'll be back," Grip promised, and the 3 visitors faded slowly from sight, taking their ghostly illumination with them. I switched on my computer, and the screen's glow echoed the light that had been there moments before. I pulled a deep breath. "I guess I have to come up with a story idea now," I told Cheshire and Pilot, giving the dog's head another pat and the cat's fur a ruffle. "Do you think you guys could help me out?" "Meow," said Cheshire, curling up on the rug. "Woof," Pilot agreed, settling his head atop my feet. And upon a midnight not so clear, I began to write.
Well, as for writing my stories at the last minute, I'll have you know I finished this story 2 days ago. Unfortunately, this event was originally planned for 6 days ago, so I guess I'm guilty as charged. This story is called Ghost Runners. It's the wind. It's the wind that gets you, weather-wise, I mean. Take cold, for instance. A crisp, still winter morning is a delight, but toss in a stiff breeze and instant ordeal. I still recall my childhood walks to the bus stop with a bitter winter wind in my face and knowing, mind you, what it would be like to be stabbed in the eyes by 1,000 tiny knitting needles. Almost all bad weather is really wind. Take away the wind and a blizzard becomes a frosty tumble of downy flakes. Steal the bluster from a thunderstorm and you are left with a steady rain to water the spring flowers and bedew the summer leaves. Even an autumn drizzle has a dreamy, contemplative air until the wind starts to blow. My point is I don't like wind. And my friends, we have had our share of it this fall. Thus it was on a night not too long ago that I found myself out in the rain walking my dog with a very uncontemplative gust howling about me, howling louder than the dog does when a strange car pulls into the driveway. That same dog was at that moment obsessively sniffing a certain spot in the driveway. At such moments, I imagine being able to talk to the dumb mutt. Okay, I'd say, you sniffed there long enough. Let's keep moving. And he'd be like, no, wait, I think something peed here. And I would say, I know, it was you, yesterday. That's you. Let's go. But the dog was committed to his work, leaving me to contemplate my unpleasantly breezy surroundings. The last few oak leaves, the ones that didn't fall into our little swimming pool, were being driven across the soggy ground by the cold blast, and I recalled Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, which describes such leaves as looking like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, an apt description if there ever was one. The wind, already registering a mark of approximately 600 knitting needles on the stabby eye scale, suddenly picked up even more, leaving me scarcely able to stay on my feet. Somewhere a dog barked, and by somewhere I mean immediately to my left and a little down because it was my dog, having finally finished with the pee spot and now fixating his mighty canine voice at something moving out in the darkness, which I could not quite see. Then it seemed to me that the very air itself was rent, and part of the wind stream began swirling up and around in a spiral about 10 feet in diameter, like a tiny sideways hurricane, only a few dog lengths ahead of me. It glowed with an eerie white light, and from this portal, as it would surely be called in a movie, stepped 9 distinct figures, 2 in front and 7 more lined up neatly behind. Not that I had time to count them then, but for reasons that shall be made clear soon, there were certainly 9. The wind still howled, so much so that verbal communication with these apparitions was impossible, even if they were able to speak. But one of the 2 in front, an avuncular man with thinning hair and a handlebar mustache, reached out his hand to me and smiled. His clothes and those of his fellows were all white, very fine, with collared shirts and high-waisted trousers, hardly the costume of a dangerous demon, I thought. He looked somehow familiar to me, and I sensed he meant no harm. These ghosts generally don't. I find if they did, this series of tales would have ended long ago, and we would have an even more difficult time recruiting and retaining storytellers than we already do. So I took his hand, left the dog to his own devices, and was guided through the swirling portal to a place I knew not where. Where I knew not turned out to be, entirely to my delight, a baseball diamond. And no, not in a cornfield. No corn. It's not that. Forget about that. In fact, baseball diamond didn't begin to describe the place. It was a baseball complex with 3 different fields, all glowing a warm emerald green under an impossibly deep blue sky. Batting cages, tees, nets, equipment racks, players walking to and fro. It was like the spring training of the gods. "Welcome to the Elysian Fields," said my mustachioed companion in a very posh, old-time English accent. "I am Arthur, and this is Plum." Arthur. Yes, I knew that face. It was Arthur Conan Doyle. Regarding once again his white outfit, I was reminded of a passage I'd read not long ago about how Conan Doyle and P.G. Wodehouse had played together on the same cricket team, appropriately enough called the Authors. And this Plum must be Wodehouse himself, so called as a variation of his middle name, Pelham. His first name, Pelham. Plum chimed in. "And these jolly fellows are the rest of our squad, what? We call ourselves the Dead Authors, and there is not a finer bunch of cricketers anywhere in the afterworld." "Well, that's wonderful," I said smoothly. "For the past decade has accustomed me to supernatural adventures of this kind. I almost feel as if I should set out some kind of shingle as an odd jobs man for the disembodied wanderer of the ether. But, unless my eyes deceive me, I went on, these are baseball fields, entirely unsuited for cricket. Quite right, my boy, said Conan Doyle, draping a beefy arm around my shoulder and gazing about the Elysian fields. But you see, heaven has become awfully crowded these days. Bloody vaccines, you know. And so souls have been for some time required to earn their spot, don't you see? We asked if we could do it by playing cricket, but blasted, there are not enough dead cricket teams to make a decent tournament these days. And we're rather tired of waiting, said Plum. So what we thought was we'd give your dashed old baseball game a try. If we could win at this, we old dogs could finally rest our tired paws and retire peacefully in the grand old Empyrean, if that's the word I want. This, I admit, did throw me a little, for I was struck by the immediate fear that the dead authors were in over their heads. I have seen exactly one cricket match in my life, but I knew a fair bit about baseball, and it's not something you can pick up on a moment's notice. I mean, if Michael Jordan couldn't get the hang of it, I doubted whether Michael Dobbs was going to be much better. Do you know how to play baseball? I asked tentatively. Know how to play? Huffed Conan Doyle. Know how to play? Of course we don't know how to play. That's what you're here for. Me? Just so, old boy, said Plum. You'll teach us the rum old American pastime, show us which mound to slide into and all that, and we'll take it from there. I mean, really, how hard can it... Good Lord, what's that? Plum had spied a passing player with a Louisville Slugger over his shoulder. You mean the baseball bat? Yeah, you use that to hit the ball. But it's round, he cried in astonishment. I mean, completely round. It's round all the way round. Yes. Well, how the devil is one supposed to hit a round ball with a round bat? That's rather a corker, isn't it? It's like trying to hit a golf ball with the handle of the club. This sort of thing continued over the next couple of days as I tried to teach the dead authors the rudiments of baseball. There was plenty of dash it and good God thrown about by the dead authors, but once they accepted, at least in a general way, that baseball couldn't be expected to conform to the rules of cricket, things got a little better. Most of the English blokes were actually pretty decent athletes when it came to it, having played cricket and tennis since their school days. They could run and catch really quite well once they got used to baseball gloves, and they weren't intimidated by fastballs either. They were smart, too, so they quickly picked up the basics of strategy, how to keep the other side off balance, why you might intentionally walk a batter, the importance of the double play, and so on. As for hitting, their cricket-inspired swings were fairly effective, at least against low pitches, but they didn't like the idea that they had to run even if they hit the ball badly. That's not cricket, someone would say, and they would all laugh, and I would angrily yell back and say, of course it wasn't cricket, the whole point is it's not cricket. But after about 10 times, I realized they were just saying that to annoy me. T.S. Eliot had grown up in the U.S., so he adapted faster than the rest of the team and was the only one who could get the hang of baseball pitching, which required a wind-up and not a run-up as the cricketers were used to, so he took the mound. Conan Doyle, who had a strong arm, played third, and Plum, who was surprisingly fast, ended up in center field. Charles Dickens, who I had met before when he was alive, it was one of those Christmas time travel things that we all deal with over the holidays, was quite a terrible player, so I put him in right. George Eliot was the only woman on the team, a fact no one remarked upon. I don't know if it was because this was something of a mixed league or if it was that nobody knew she was a woman. I inclined to the latter view after learning that Dickens, for one, was under the impression that George was T.S. Eliot's little brother. But she was used to playing a man's game better than the men around her and made a capable second-base person. And so with Arnold Bennett at first and Graham Greene at short and Stuart Hall in left, we had a team. Our first game was against the Canadian authors, who seemed like they had a great deal of talent but never quite came together as a unit. In the fifth inning, Mordecai Richler started yelling at Gabriel Waugh for failing to hustle down the line for a ground ball. Raw took it badly, and the two almost came to blows before Hugh McLennan broke it up. We were tied going into the eighth when Conan Doyle golfed a 3-run homer just over the left field fence, and we held on to win. The Canadian catcher, a tall, heavily bearded old man with intense eyes, gave me a dark glare as the teams left the field, as though I were a traitor to my country. But I met his gaze, whoever he was, and said, "Better luck next year, Beardy." This victory led us to the tournament's semifinal against a formidable team, the Americans. The Americans were favored in some circles because of their experience with the game and their roster of fierce competitors. Fortunately for us, our pitcher kept us in the game, at one point striking out Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, and Stephen Crane in order. But our offense couldn't take advantage. Our boys were tiring, and when Bennett, Green, and Hall all popped out weakly in the top of the ninth, I had a dark presentiment that the Yanks were going to walk it off in the bottom of the inning. A short time later, it seemed as though my premonition were coming true. The Americans had the bases loaded with just one out, thanks to an epically bad throw by Dickens. And then the next American, Washington Irving, hit a screaming line drive over second base. It looked as if the game was over until out of nowhere, George Eliot made a diving grab worthy of Roberto Alomar, then flipped the ball to our shortstop Green, who was covering second, catching Dashiell Hammett off base, and ending the threat with a stunning double play. Energized by this incredible display, the dead authors came to life in the 10th, scoring 2 runs on Plum's bases-clearing triple. T.S. Eliot laid waste to the top of the American order in the bottom of the 10th, and just like that, we were in the finals. So preoccupied had we been in facing the much ballyhooed Americans, we hadn't even wondered about who we might meet in the finals. But when he broke the news at a team meeting, Conan Doyle could not conceal the scowl beneath his mustache. "We're playing the characters," he informed us grimly. "Oh, blast it," said Plum. "I thought the commissioner ruled that literary characters were ineligible for the tournament." "He had," returned Conan Doyle, "but their lawyer is Perry Mason. And short story, even shorter, they're in." "Characters?" I inquired. "Literary characters? How is that possible?" "The afterlife," said Arnold Bennett, "is like mortal life. We don't make the rules, and they are not fair. And yet we must abide by them." "Well, I suppose we have just as good a chance against Captain Ahab as we did against Melville," I said cheerily, and a ripple of sardonic laughter spread out around me. "What you fail to understand," said T.S. Eliot, joining the conversation, "is that these are not just any characters. They're baseball characters. Some of them are big leaguers." "Confound it," said Plum, "that hardly seems sporting. These players are, what's the American expression? Ringers. They're dead ringers." Sorry about that. "Well, there's got to be a way," I said, "and if there isn't, we'll leave it all out on the field." Fortunately for us, literary characters who were based on real people were not permitted on the characters' team, so at least we didn't have to face shoeless Joe Jackson hitting cleanup. I told you, no cornfields. But that bit of news got me thinking. "Listen," I said to the team as we were about to take the field for the championship game a few days later. "The thing about literary characters is they all have weaknesses. That's what makes them great characters, but it's what makes them bad ball players, at least sometimes. And you're all authors, so you know how characters think. In the battle between authors and characters, I take the authors every time." And that's how the dead authors managed to hang in against a pretty fearsome bunch of fictional ball players. Billy Chappell from For Love of the Game was their pitcher, an aging star who still had something left in the tank. But he was unlucky in love, so whenever we were deep in the count, someone would heckle him by asking him how his girlfriend was, and we could usually get him to cough up a walk. T.S. Eliot managed to strike out Roy Hobbs that way a couple of times, too, by taking advantage of the fact that we knew from the natural that Hobbs was once paid off to throw a big game. Not that we paid him off, though that was Dickens' suggestion, but we'd make snide reference to it once in a while, and it put him in a slump. So it looked extremely promising for us as we headed into the bottom of the ninth, leading 6-4 with 2 outs and nobody on. But nothing is ever easy in the world of the supernatural, and wouldn't you know it, Joe Hardy from Damn Yankees had a bit of magic left in his bat and walloped a triple. Standing on the steps of the dugout, I looked carefully at their lineup card and suddenly had an idea. It was risky, but it made sense, so I called time and went out to the mound. "Walk Drobut," I said. "I think I can get him," said Elliot. "Maybe, but look who's coming up next." The poet looked at the on-deck circle, then back to me, nodded and smiled, and he did as he was told. Next up was the most impressive-looking of all of the characters, tall and broad-shouldered, with an easy swagger and a confident smile. He sauntered to the plate like he owned the whole field. It was Casey. Yes, Casey. Mighty Casey was advancing to the bat. I knew from the poem, Casey at the Bat, that Casey lived for big situations like this, but if he lived up to his reputation, he would be overconfident, and that would be his undoing. It had to be. Everything was riding on me being right. Elliot worked and fired a strike right down the middle, and Casey didn't even take the bat off his shoulder. Yes, I thought. To think my mother told me that studying poetry would never have any practical value. On the mound, Elliot threw another fastball, and Casey let it go for strike 2. But he wouldn't take another pitch. He'd be swinging this time for sure. Now Elliot could throw him a change or a curve, and he'd swing through it, and the dead authors would win. We were so close. Once more, the ball flew, and Casey did swing, and he did hit it a mile to deep right field. That wasn't in the poem. Oh, what a lousy time for character development. The universe seemed to slow down as the ball carried further and further toward the fence. But in those brief seconds, there was still some hope. If the ball stayed in the yard and was caught, we would still win. And out there running for it was, oh no, Dickens. Dickens had not played well all tournament, but now he was, as the sportscasters say, on his horse, sprinting towards the ball as it hurtled towards the right field fence. He was at the warning track. The ball was coming down. He leapt. The ball met the leather of his glove just as Dickens crashed into the fence. The ball popped out of his glove and rolled into the corner as the defeated Victorian collapsed unconscious on the turf. By the time Plum got to the ball and threw home, mighty Casey had rounded the bases for an inside-the-park home run, and it was all over. The dead authors had lost. I sat in the dugout, stunned. It was my fault. If I hadn't made Elliot walk Lumpy Drobut, Casey might have never come to bat, and we might have won. I blew a 2-run lead in the bottom of the 9th. After sitting there for I don't know how long, I looked up and realized I was alone. But I had to face the players and apologize, so I trudged down into the locker room feeling I deserved whatever fusillade of colorful curses my players' mighty pens had ready for me. But as I entered the locker room, a cheer went up, apparently for me. Champagne was flowing and music was blaring. "There's the old skipper," said Plum, trying to throw a chummy arm around my neck, but quite inebriated, he missed and toppled into a laundry hamper. You guys know we lost, right?" "Well, of course we do," said Conan Doyle, "but what a loss, what a finish, an end worthy of this band of brothers." "You're not mad at me?" "Oh, rubbish," said Plum, crawling out of the hamper with a jersey on his head. "What's the expression? We'll get them next year. Besides, without you, we never would have come this far." Feeling infinite relief, I joined the party in earnest. After another hour or so, someone realized that Dickens wasn't there, and after a bit of head-scratching, it suddenly broke upon us that the poor man had been left unconscious out in right field. But George Eliot and Stuart Hall managed to find him in the dark, revive him, and get him to the party where he was heralded as a hero for very nearly making the best play in team history. The party over, it was time for leave-taking. The authors were off to wander through eternity until next year's tournament. Most of them were quite taken with baseball and promised to practice in the off-season so as to be even more competitive next time around. I wished them well, and Conan Doyle opened the portal for me to return me to my own time and place. I said my goodbyes and stepped back into the same windy, rainy driveway with my dog still barking as if nothing had happened. The portal closed so quickly the animal was stunned into silence, but he trotted over and sniffed around a bit before bounding back to the door to the house, eager to get his bedtime treats and have the living room couch all to himself for the night. I looked up into the dark sky where the moon was just barely visible through the now breaking cloud and wished my new friends on the other side the very best. Wind is the culprit behind the summer and winter storm alike, but it also carries the merry kite and drives the billowing sail. It transports the wishes of the dandelion and electrifies the future. I couldn't know where my teammates were in that moment or how long they would have to wait for their final reward, but in the darkness I said a little prayer for them, wishing them straight roads to travel and the wind always at their backs. Thank you.